The shuttle descended through the purple clouds of Nexus Station, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the viewport, like a child seeing snow for the first time, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the most beautiful structure humanity had ever encountered. The station hung in the void between three star systems, a massive construction of crystal spires and flowing metal that caught the light of distant suns and scattered it into rainbows. And Elena felt her heart beating faster as she realized that today would change everything for her. Species humanity was young among the stars. Barely 50 years since the first alien signal had reached Earth and turned everything humans believed about the universe upside down. And now they stood at the threshold of something greater than any of them had ever imagined. Ambassador, we are beginning our approach, Captain Rodriguez announced from the cockpit, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. And Elena nodded even though he could not see her. She straightened her uniform, a simple blue suit with the golden Earth emblem on her chest, and took a deep breath to calm her nerves, reminding herself that billions of people back home were counting on her to succeed. The Concord of 12 had ruled gnome space for longer than humanity had possessed written language. 12 species bound together by ancient treaties and shared history, and they had finally agreed to consider Earth's request to join their alliance. Elena knew what the other species thought of humans, because she had read every report and studied every intercepted communication that Earth's intelligence services had gathered over the decades. They called humanity the Death Worlders, a species that had evolved on a planet of extreme temperatures and violent weather, surrounded by predators and poisonous creatures. Forced to fight for survival every single day, they marveled at how humans could eat foods that would kill most other species, how they could survive injuries that would be fatal to anyone else, how they kept going even when their bodies were broken and bleeding. But that reputation came with fear, and Elena understood that many in the Concord saw humanity not as potential allies, but as potential threats. Dangerous animals that needed to be contained before they spread across the galaxy. Her mission was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. To prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars, that they could be trusted, that they wanted peace and cooperation rather than conquest and war. The shuttle passed through the station's energy barrier and entered a vast hangar filled with ships of every shape and size, vessels from a dozen different worlds, each one a testament to the diversity of life in the universe. Elena stood as the shuttle touched down, and she felt the eyes of history upon her as the door slid open and she stepped onto alien metal for the first time. The welcoming delegation was overwhelming in its strangeness, and Elena had to remind herself not to stare as creatures from her wildest dreams and nightmares approached to greet her. Cherith came first, insectoid beings with gleaming shells and clicking mandibles, their compound eyes reflecting Elena's image 1,000 times as they extended their forelimbs in what she knew was a gesture of peace. "Welcome to Nexus Station, Ambassador of Earth," the lead Cherith said through a translator device, its voice buzzing with harmonics that made Elena's ears tingle. "We are honored by your presence." Behind them stood the Gorth, massive beings of stone and metal that towered 3 meters tall, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder as they offered their own greetings. The Luminari floated nearby, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, pulsing with soft blue light that shifted to warm gold as they welcomed her. And there were others. So many others, representatives of species that Elena had only read about in classified briefings, each one watching her with curiosity and suspicion and something that might have been hope. She greeted each delegation according to their customs, having spent months memorizing every gesture and phrase, every tradition and taboo. Determined to make no mistakes on this most important of days, the negotiations began the following morning in the Grand Atrium. A vast chamber at the heart of the station, where crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves. And Elena felt very small as she took her seat among giants day after day. She argued humanity's case, presenting evidence of Earth's technological achievements and cultural richness, answering endless questions about human history and intentions, pushing back against those who saw her species as nothing but clever animals. The Thracians were the worst, an ancient reptilian species whose representative, Lord Executor Kethmarus, made no secret of his contempt for humanity. "You speak of peace," he said during one session, his forked tongue flickering between sharp teeth. "But your history is written in blood. Your advancement built on the bones of your own kind. And you expect us to welcome you as equals." Elena kept her voice calm, even as anger burned in her chest, responding with dignity. "Every species has darkness in its past, Lord Executor, but humanity has learned from its mistakes, and we have chosen a different path." Kethmaros laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the chamber, and Elena saw the fear behind his contempt. The worry that humanity might indeed become everything the Thracians feared. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Elena began to make progress, forming friendships with delegates who were willing to look past the rumors and see humanity for what it truly was. She learned to appreciate the Valkyrie tea ceremonies and the Garath poetry that sounded like earthquakes given voice. And she shared human music and art with species who had never seen a sunset on Earth. Hope began to grow in her heart, a fragile thing but real. And Elena started to believe that her mission might actually succeed. She was walking through the grand atrium one evening, admiring the way the artificial stars reflected off the crystal floor. When she heard footsteps behind her, Elena turned, expecting to see one of the friends she had made. Perhaps the young Cherith delegate who had become fascinated with human literature. Instead, she saw a figure in dark robes, moving faster than anything that Psi should be able to move. And her training kicked in just a moment too late. The blade entered her chest before she could scream, a molecular edge that sliced through her uniform and flesh and bone like they were nothing. And Elena felt cold spreading through her body as she fell. The Vionula colony. Last thing she saw before darkness took her was the assassin's face, a Silith mercenary with scales the color of dried blood. And then there was only pain and the distant sound of screaming Ambassador Elena Vasquez. The hope of humanity lay dying on alien marble as the galaxy watched in horror, her blood pooling beneath her like a dark mirror reflecting the artificial stars above. The screaming seemed to come from everywhere at once as Elena's body hit the cold marble floor. And for a moment, the grand atrium descended into complete chaos as 100 different species tried to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The Luminari were the loudest, their crystalline forms pulsing with violent red light as they shrieked in frequencies that shattered nearby glass. Their peaceful nature unable to process such sudden violence, Cherith guards swarmed into the atrium with weapons drawn, their compound eyes scanning for threats. But the assassin had already vanished into the shadows like smoke dissolving in wind. And in the center of it all lay Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the first human to ever address the Concord of 12, her blood spreading across the ancient floor in an ever-widening pool. The human delegation reacted with a speed that shocked everyone watching. 2 security officers reaching Elena within seconds, while a third activated an emergency beacon that would summon help from the human ship waiting nearby. "She is still alive," one of them shouted, pressing his hands against the wound even as blood poured through his fingers. "Get the medical pod, now." The other species watched in horrified fascination as the humans worked, their movements precise and desperate, refusing to accept what seemed inevitable to everyone else. A Gorath healer approached, its massive form moving with surprising gentleness, and it scanned Elena with technology that had been saving lives for millennia before humans had learned to make fire. The damage is catastrophic, the Goroth rumbled, its voice heavy with sorrow. The blade has pierced her lung and damaged her heart. And even our medicine cannot repair such wounds in time. The human security officer looked up, and the Goroth was surprised to see not despair in his eyes, but determination. A stubborn refusal to accept reality that seemed almost insane. "Then we will use our medicine," he said. And at that moment, a team of human doctors burst through the doors carrying equipment that looked primitive compared to what the station possessed, but the humans did not seem to care about appearances. As they surrounded their fallen ambassador and began to work, their hands moving with practiced efficiency, their voices calm despite the crisis, establishing artificial respiration. Begin blood transfusion from stored supply. Prep the regeneration nets, the lead doctor called out. And the other species could only watch in amazement as the humans fought death itself. The surgery took 19 hours. And during that time, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. News feeds across 1,000 worlds showing the same image of humans bent over their dying ambassador. Species that had never thought much about humanity before found themselves glued to their screens, watching these strange soft creatures battle against impossible odds with nothing but primitive tools and sheer will. The Chirith delegation sent prayers according to their customs, clicking softly in ancient rhythms meant to guide lost souls home, while the Luminari dimmed their lights in a gesture of mourning respect. Lord Executor Kethmaros watched from his private chambers, his reptilian face showing no emotion, but his claws dug into the armrests of his chair as hour after hour the humans refused to let their ambassador die. And then, against all logic and expectation, the lead doctor stepped back from the operating table and announced in a voice hoarse with exhaustion that Ambassador Vasquez would live. The galaxy erupted in reaction. Shock and joy and disbelief mixing together as the news spread from system to system. And for a brief moment, the attack itself was forgotten in the miracle of survival. But the Concord of 12 had not forgotten. And an emergency session was called to determine what had happened and who was responsible for this unprecedented violation of the station's neutrality. The Silith representative was the first to speak. A scarred veteran named Treshvok, who had been a mercenary himself before entering politics. And he denied all knowledge of the attack. The assassin was not acting under our authority, Treshvok insisted, his forked tongue nervous. He was a rogue, an outcast, someone who had been banished from our clan years ago. The chamber erupted in angry voices, a dozen species shouting accusations and demands. But silence fell when the Chirith intelligence director rose to present evidence that had been gathered in the hours since the attack. "We have traced the assassin's communications," the Chirith said, clicking through holographic displays that showed encrypted messages and financial transactions. "And we have found the source of his payment." The display changed to show a symbol that made several delegates gasp. The official seal of the hegemony of Thrace. And suddenly all eyes turned to Lord Executor Kethmaros. For a long moment the Thracian said nothing, his yellow eyes scanning the chamber as if calculating odds and outcomes. And then he did something that no one expected. He smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. And he rose from his seat to address the assembly with no trace of shame or regret. "Yes," Kethmaros said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent chamber. "We hired the assassin, and we would do so again if given the opportunity." The shock was absolute. Delegates frozen in their seats as the Lord Executor continued speaking, his contempt for humanity and their supporters clear in every word. "You fools cannot see what is happening," he declared, gesturing toward the human delegation with one clawed hand. "You welcome these creatures as if they are harmless, as if they will be content with one world, or 10 or 100. He began to pace, his voice rising with passion that bordered on madness. Humanity is a plague species, a cancer that will spread through the galaxy until they have consumed everything. And history will thank us for trying to stop them before it was too late. The chamber remained silent as Kethmaros finished his speech and returned to his seat, seeming satisfied with himself, apparently believing that he had done the right thing. Finally, the oldest member of the Concord, a Velkari elder whose body was more crystal than flesh, spoke in a voice like wind chimes in a storm. "You have admitted to attempted murder on neutral ground," the elder said. "You have violated treaties that have kept peace for 10,000 years, and you have done so without shame or remorse." Kethmaros shrugged, his scales rippling with the gesture. "The Thracians have ruled this galaxy since before your species could walk upright, and we will do what we must to ensure that rule continues." The elder turned to where the human delegation sat, their faces pale but composed, and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. What does humanity say in response to this confession? The human representative who had taken Elena's place, a young man named David Chen, rose slowly from his seat and looked around the chamber at all the watching faces. "Humanity will respond," he said, his voice quiet but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "When Ambassador Vasquez has recovered enough to speak for herself." And with that, the humans left the chamber, leaving behind a silence that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Heavy with potential and terrible with promise. The galaxy had seen humanity fight for one of their own against death itself. And now they waited to see how humanity would respond to those who had tried to take her away. The ship emerged from hyperspace like a predator rising from deep water, its massive hull blocking out the stars as it took position near Nexus Station. And every species in the galaxy recognized what they were seeing. The Unresolve was humanity's first true warship, a vessel built not for exploration or trade, but for one purpose only. And that purpose was written in every line of its brutal design. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the station grow larger in the viewport, his dark face calm despite the weight of what he had been sent to do. "Admiral, we are receiving hails from the station and from 17 different species demanding to know our intentions," his communications officer reported. Her voice tight with tension. Okonkwo nodded slowly, taking his time before responding, letting the galaxy wonder and worry about what humanity planned to do next. "Tell him I'm here to speak with Lord Executor Kethmaros," he finally said, alone, unarmed, and in person. The silence on the bridge was heavy as the message went out, and every officer present wondered if they were about to witness the start of an interstellar war back on Earth. Hidden in the asteroid belt and scattered across a dozen moons, 47 more ships waited for orders. A fleet that humanity had built in secret while pretending to be peaceful newcomers to the galactic stage. Nobody had known about this fleet except for the highest levels of human government. And even now the rest of the galaxy only suspected that more ships existed without knowing how many or where they were. Admiral Okonkwo had hoped never to reveal the resolve, had hoped that humanity could join the Concord through diplomacy and negotiation. But the attack on Ambassador Vasquez had changed everything. Now he had a different mission, one that required him to walk a line sharper than any blade, to project strength without starting a war, to make humanity's position clear without firing a single shot. Lord Executor Kethmaros agreed to the meeting with obvious amusement, confident in his own power and certain that the humans had come to beg or threaten or bluster. Uselessly, they met in a private chamber on Nexus Station, just the two of them as Okonkwo had requested, separated by a table of polished alien wood that had been growing when humans still lived in caves. "So," Kethmaros said, leaning back in his chair with a predator's lazy confidence, "the humans send their warrior to speak for them. And what will this warrior say, I wonder?" Okonkwo did not sit. choosing instead to stand at the viewport and look out at the stars while he gathered his thoughts. "I am not here to threaten you," he said quietly. "I am here to ask you a question." Kathmaros laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "A question. The mighty human warship appears on our doorstep, and its commander wants to ask questions like a student before a teacher." "Why?" Okonkwo asked, turning to face the Thracian at last. "Why did you try to kill Ambassador Vasquez?" The question seemed to catch Kathmaros off guard, as if he had expected demands or accusations rather than simple curiosity. "I already explained this to the Concord," he said, his amusement fading slightly. "Humanity is a threat that must be eliminated before it grows too strong." Okonkwo nodded slowly, as if considering this answer, and then he began to speak in a voice that was calm and conversational, almost friendly. "Let me tell you about human history," he said. "Not the parts that make us look good, but the parts that should terrify you." He spoke of the world wars, of trenches filled with poison gas and cities burned to ash, of weapons that could split atoms and turn entire regions into wastelands of radiation and death. He spoke of genocides and ethnic cleansings, of human beings slaughtering each other by the millions for reasons of race or religion or simple hatred. He spoke of the Cold War, when two nations had pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to destroy their planets several times over, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. Maris listened without interrupting, his reptilian eyes narrowing as the human continued to catalog horrors that made the Thracians' worst atrocities seem almost gentle by comparison. "We know what we are capable of," Okonkwo said, his voice never rising above that calm conversational tone. "We have seen ourselves at our worst. We have looked into the abyss of our own extinction, and we have pulled ourselves back from the edge." He stepped closer to Kathmaros, close enough that the Thracian could see every line on his face, every year of experience written in his dark eyes. "Not once," the Admiral continued. "Dozens of times we have stood at the brink of annihilation and chosen to step back. We have beaten the monster inside ourselves again and again." Kathmaros said nothing, but something had changed in his posture, some of that lazy confidence draining away as he began to understand what the human was really saying. "You think you struck first," Okonkwo said. "You think you have shown us our place, taught us to fear you. But you have made a terrible mistake." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You have assumed that because we came in peace. We are peaceful creatures who do not know how to fight. But the truth is exactly the opposite." The Admiral straightened and walked back toward the viewport, giving Kathmaros time to process his words before continuing. "We chose peace because we know war," he said, looking out at the stars. "We chose diplomacy because we have seen what happens when diplomacy fails. We chose to send an ambassador instead of a fleet because we have learned, painfully and at great cost, that there are better ways to solve problems." He turned back to face the Thracian one final time. "Ambassador Vasquez will recover. And when she does, she will return to the negotiating table because that is what humanity wants. Peace and cooperation and a place among the stars." Okonkwo walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "But know this, Lord Executor, if she had died on that floor, we would not have come with one ship." His voice hardened, just slightly, but enough to send a chill down the Thracian's spine. "We would have come with all of them, and we would not have stopped until Thrace was nothing but a memory. And the galaxy would have learned why our own species fears what we might become." He left without waiting for a response, leaving Kathmaros sitting alone in the chamber, staring at the door through which the human had departed for the first time in his very long life. The Lord Executor of Thrace understood what it meant to be afraid, not of what an enemy might do, but of what they were clearly capable of doing and had chosen not to do. Human ship remained in position near Nexus Station for 3 more days. Its weapons never powering up, its fighters never launching. Simply waiting as humanity made its point without saying another word when it finally departed. Jumping back to hyperspace with a flash of light, it left behind a galaxy that would never look at humanity the same way again. They had seen the closed fist, and they had seen it choose to remain closed, and somehow that was more frightening than any threat could ever be. The months that followed Admiral Okonkwo's visit were quiet ones, at least on the surface. But beneath that calm exterior, the entire galaxy was shifting in ways that would have been unthinkable. Just a year before Lord Executor Kethmarus returned to Thrace, expecting to be celebrated as a hero, the leader who had struck the first blow against humanity's expansion. But what he found instead was uncertainty and whispered questions. The other Thracian nobles had watched the confrontation on Nexus Station through their spy networks, had seen their mighty Lord Executor sit in silence as a human spoke of horrors beyond imagination, and they had begun to wonder if they had chosen the wrong enemy. But Kethmarus was not ready to give up. His pride would not allow him to admit that he had miscalculated. And so he began planning his next move while humanity did something far more dangerous than building weapons. They made friends, human ambassadors spread across the galaxy. Not to the powerful species who dominated the Concord, but to the smaller ones, the forgotten ones, the species who had been pushed aside and exploited by Thracian dominance for thousands of years. The Velinari had been mining precious metals for Thracian factories at prices that barely covered their costs, until human traders arrived offering fair compensation and technology, sharing agreements that changed their economy overnight. The Chirith colonies on the Outer Rim had been denied representation in the Concord for generations, their concerns ignored by the major powers, until human diplomats began advocating for their inclusion in important discussions. The Gorath homeworld had been struggling with a disease that Thracian medical companies refused to cure. Without payment, the Gorath could not afford, until human doctors arrived with treatments they shared freely, asking nothing in return. One by one, species who had been invisible for millennia found themselves with a new ally, a strange, soft-skinned species from a distant world who seemed genuinely interested in helping others succeed. And as humanity built these friendships, they also built their economy, their human merchants undercutting Thracian monopolies with fair deals and honest trading, their engineers solving problems that other species had struggled with. For centuries, the Thracians watched their power erode like a beach being eaten by the tide, each wave small on its own, but devastating in accumulation. And Kethmarus grew more desperate with each passing month. They are playing the long game, he told his advisors during one late-night council, his claws scratching against the table in frustration. They know they cannot defeat us in open war, so they are strangling us slowly instead. His military commanders urged patience, arguing that humanity's fleet was still too small to threaten Thracian dominance. But Kethmarus was not interested in waiting. He had ruled through fear for too long to accept this slow diminishment. And he began searching for a way to strike at humanity that would end them once and for all. The plan he developed was elegant in its cruelty. A bioweapon designed specifically for human biology, engineered from samples his spies had collected over years of observation. It would spread through the air, carried by wind and breath, killing humans within days while leaving every other species untouched. And Kethmarus planned to release it on Earth itself during a trade delegation visit. The weapon took 6 months to develop in secret laboratories hidden in the outer reaches of Thracian space. And when it was finally ready, Kethmarus felt certain that he had found the solution to humanity's threat. He never suspected that human intelligence services had known about his plan from the very Beginning Earth spy agencies had spent centuries perfecting the art of surveillance and infiltration, learning from each other, competing against each other, and developing techniques that the galaxy had never seen before. Within weeks of Kethmaros beginning his weapons program, human agents had infiltrated his research facilities, his communications networks, and even his personal staff. They watched and waited as the weapon was developed, gathering evidence that would prove Thracian guilt beyond any doubt. And when the bioweapon was finally loaded onto a ship bound for Earth, they were ready. The interception happened in deep space, far from any witnesses. Human ships appearing from nowhere to surround the Thracian vessel before it could escape. The crew surrendered without a fight, too shocked by the sudden ambush to resist. And the bioweapon was secured along with enough evidence to condemn the entire Thracian leadership. But humanity did not keep this victory secret. They did not use it as leverage for quiet negotiations or private advantage. Instead, they broadcast everything to every world in the galaxy. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Laboratory records and communications and testimony from captured scientists, all showing that the Thracian government had planned to commit genocide against an entire species. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The Gorath, who had been Thrace's most powerful military ally for 3,000 years, announced that they were withdrawing their support and would no longer honor their mutual defense treaties. The Luminari, ancient and wise, declared that they could no longer share a council with a species capable of such evil, and they severed all diplomatic relations with Thrace. Even the Chirith, who had remained carefully neutral throughout galactic politics for longer than anyone could remember, issued a formal condemnation and demanded that Kethmaros face justice. Within days, the hegemony of Thrace found itself completely isolated. Their allies turned enemies, their trade routes closed, their mighty empire suddenly standing alone against a galaxy united in disgust. And through it all, humanity remained calm, their representatives speaking of justice and accountability rather than revenge. Their ships staying in their own territory rather than moving to attack Ambassador Elena Vasquez, still recovering from her wounds, gave a single statement from her hospital bed that was broadcast across 1,000 worlds. "The Thracians tried to kill me," she said, her voice weak but steady. "And then they tried to kill all of us. But we did not respond with hatred or vengeance. We responded with truth." She paused, gathering her strength before continuing. "This is who humanity is. We do not want war. We do not want destruction. We want justice, and we want peace. And we believe that even our enemies deserve the chance to face their crimes before a fair tribunal." Lord Executor Kethmaros watched her statement alone in his palace, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt meaningless. And he finally understood the full extent of his miscalculation. He had thought humanity was weak because they preferred peace, had thought their kindness was a flaw to be exploited, and he had never imagined that their restraint was actually their greatest weapon. The empire he had spent his life building was crumbling around him, not because humanity had destroyed it with their ships, but because they had exposed its foundations for what they truly were. And as his own nobles began calling for his resignation, as his own people took to the streets demanding change, Kethmaros realized that humanity had won without ever firing a shot. 1 year had passed since the blade had entered Elena Vasquez's chest. 1 year since her blood had stained the marble floor of the grand atrium. And now she stood in that same chamber as the galaxy watched and waited. The scar on her chest had faded to a thin white line, barely visible beneath her formal uniform. But she wore it proudly as a reminder of how far they had all come. The chamber was different now, expanded to accommodate representatives from species who had never before had a voice in galactic affairs, filled with delegates from worlds that had been forgotten or ignored under Thracian dominance. The Concord of 12 was no more. dissolved by unanimous vote of its members, and in its place stood something new. Something that humanity had helped create. They called it the Galactic Assembly, and its founding principles were written in words that humans recognized. Words about equality and representation and justice that had first been spoken on Earth centuries ago. Elena looked around at the assembled delegates and felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope, genuine and powerful and impossible to ignore. The Gorath delegation rumbled their approval as she approached the speaking platform, their stone faces carved into expressions that she had learned to recognize as respect. The luminary pulsed with warm golden light, their crystalline forms casting dancing patterns on the walls as they welcomed her return. Even the Chirith, normally so reserved in their emotions, clicked their mandibles in what Elena knew was their equivalent of applause. She reached the platform and turned to face them all. These beings from 100 different worlds who had come together to build something better than what had existed before. 1 year ago, she began, her voice strong despite the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. I came to this station believing that humanity could find a place among the stars. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the chamber, confusion and concern rippling through the crowd until Elena raised her hand for silence. I was wrong because I thought too small, she continued. I thought we were asking for permission to join something that already existed. But I understand now that we were actually being invited to help build something new. She gestured to the expanded chamber, to the new seats that had been added for species that had never had representation before. Look around you. The Velinari are here. The outer colony Chirith are here. The forgotten peoples of the Rim are here. Voices that were silenced for thousands of years are finally being heard. Alana's voice grew stronger as she spoke, carrying to every corner of the chamber. This did not happen because humanity is special or superior. It happened because we refused to accept that the old way was the only way. It happened because we believe that every species deserves dignity and respect. She thought of Admiral Okonkwo, watching this broadcast from his ship somewhere in human space. The fleet he commanded still hidden, but no longer needed for war. She thought of the doctors who had saved her life, working through 19 hours of surgery because humans simply did not know how to give up. She thought of the intelligence officers who had uncovered the Thracian bioweapon, the diplomats who had built alliances with forgotten species, the traders who had offered fair deals to worlds that had never known fairness. All of them had played their part in bringing the galaxy to this moment. And Elena felt their presence behind her like a warm wind at her back. The hegemony of Thrace has fallen, she said, not because we destroyed it, but because it could not survive the light of truth. Lord Executor Kethmaris was not present today. He was awaiting trial before a tribunal that included judges from every species in the assembly, including a human. His empire had crumbled when his own people had turned against him, when the Thracian nobility had realized that their ancient traditions of dominance were leading them to destruction. But Elena had not come to gloat over fallen enemies. She had come to speak about the future. Humanity has been asked what we want as members of this assembly, she said. And I want to answer that question honestly. The chamber fell silent, everyone waiting to hear what humanity would demand, what price they would exact for their victory. We want justice, Elena said. But we also want mercy. She saw surprise on many faces, confusion on others, and she understood why. The galaxy had expected humanity to seek revenge. Lord Executor Kethmaros ordered my death, she acknowledged. He planned genocide against my entire species, and there is no question that he must face consequences for his actions. Her voice softened slightly, though it lost none of its strength. But the Thracian people are not their ruler. They are not responsible for his crimes, and they should not be punished for the evil done in their name. Elena remembered something, Admiral. Okonkwo had told her during one of his visits to her hospital room, something that had stayed with her through all the long months of recovery. Humanity knows what happens when an entire people is punished for the sins of their leaders, she said. We have seen cycles of revenge destroy civilizations. We have watched hatred pass from generation to generation, until no one remembers how it started. She placed her hand over the scar on her chest, over the place where a Thracian hire blade had nearly ended her life. I choose to break that cycle here and now. I choose to forgive without forgetting, to demand justice without demanding vengeance. The chamber was absolutely still, every being present understanding that they were witnessing something important, something that would be remembered for generations to come. This is what humanity offers the galaxy, Elena concluded. Not our ships, though we have them, not our technology, though we will share it freely, not our strength, though we have proven we are not weak. She looked around one final time, meeting as many eyes as she could. We offer hope. Hope that the future does not have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Hope that enemies can become friends. Hope that even after the darkest night, dawn will come. The applause began with the Gorth, their massive hands coming together with sounds like thunder, and it spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass until every species was showing their approval in whatever way their biology allowed. Elena stepped back from the platform as the noise washed over her, and she felt tears running down her face. Tears of joy and relief and gratitude for all who had brought them to this moment in the back of the chamber, almost invisible in the shadows. Admiral James Okonkwo watched the broadcast on a small screen and allowed himself a rare smile. The fleet at Seoul had never fired a shot, and with luck it never would, but it would remain. Because humanity had learned the most important lesson of all: the best way to ensure peace is to make the cost of war unthinkable. And the best way to build a future is to offer enemies a chance to become part of it. Elena Vasquez, ambassador of Earth, survivor and symbol and beacon of hope, raised her hand in a simple wave to the cheering assembly. One attack had been meant to end humanity's hopes, and instead it had changed the fate of the galaxy forever, not through destruction, but through the simple radical act of choosing something better.